and welcome to the 2024 Sarachek Seating Show. My name's Ari Schaff. Alongside me is the one and only Akiva Poppers. And Akiva, this is a little bit different than years past in terms of format for this year's Sarachek tournament.
That's right. We've been used to in years past 20 teams, and then post-COVID there were 24 teams, and now we're at 21 teams, but it's really 20 teams because one of them is a play-in game. But something unique for this year's tournament is that we're going to have 16 teams eligible for Tier 1. Back in the day when there were 20 teams, there were only 12 teams eligible. When there were 24, there were 16 eligible. The committee has found a way to keep 16 teams eligible, and we'll explain further how that'll work in terms of the bracketing. But you should just know, we'll read off 20 to 17 seeds. They'll not be eligible for Tier 1, but 16 through 1 will be eligible.
So with that being said, we're going to get right into it. Number 20 seed in this year's Sarachek tournament is the Kushner Cobras. Now, Akiva, obviously number 20 is, not the best seed out there, but again, what does this team have?
Yeah, well, it's been a while since they were in Sarachek, and the committee decided to invite them back. And so we'll note, we'll note later on in the show, with the seedings, we have absolutely no say in it. We're totally not involved. We're just letting you know. The same thing goes with the teams. There's a tournament committee involved with this. We're just letting you know what the results of the committee's decision making are. So, Kushner, the last time they were in Sarachek, they competed with Eula in a Tier 3 championship and lost there. All time in Sarachek, they're 4-4. This year, they were not very good. They went 1-13 in the Yeshiva League. They beat Hank by 4 early in the year, and that's it. Disappointing season for them, and obviously they'll be looking for some redemption and a positive note to end the year.
At number 19, we have the Or HaTorah Thunder. Now, this is a team that we have not seen in this Sarachek tournament yet. What can you say about them?
Yeah, the reason why we haven't seen them in the Sarachek tournament is because it's their first time in Sarachek, out of Hollywood, Florida. And, this year they've been slightly inconsistent. They've struggled at moments to keep the consistency. But they did play Cats close twice. And then Cats Yeshiva a week ago went to California, where they beat all 3 of the California teams in this tournament. So Cats is not in this tournament, but obviously a respectable team in Cats, who they played close twice. They didn't beat them either time. They have a couple of players who are Cohens, who are not related, who are good players. Yishai Cohen is a good shooter, and he's very aggressive inside. And Yaniv Cohen brings a lot of energy. Just a couple of guys to watch from them. But we're curious to see how they're going to perform in their first Sarachek appearance. Sometimes there'll be little jitters,
Right.
Not sure how it's going to go.
At number 18, we have the Hebrew Academy of Montreal Heat. Again, up north, let's see what they have coming into the United States of America.
Yeah, well, they play in Montreal, where they have a 24-second shot clock, but they can't be, and they're pretty young. They have no seniors, because in Montreal they don't have seniors, but they must be severely disappointed with being put at the number 18 seed. They won their JV tournament, in which all the teams competing there besides for themselves have 9th and 10th graders. Yeshiva League, and they have 10th and 11th graders. But they won it handily. They handled all the teams in that competition pretty well, including several good teams, TABC JV, Hillel JV. They really didn't have a close game. And they have who I consider to be the next best Jewish 9th grader in the country, in Simon Alul, who I think is going to be a stud. And Yaakov Ohayon also averages over 25 points per game, also a very talented player. Montreal, we're used to seeing near the bottom of the seedings. I'm just not sure that they belong at the bottom this year. This year, I think, might be a little different. So maybe they'll be able to make some noise in Tier 2. Something to note, they did lose one of their better players, Zach Levy, to a bad injury in that JV tournament, so he's not going to be able to play. So they will be down him. But even with what they have left, I do think they are a good team.
Yeah, as you said, at Tier 2, winning Tier 2 is, it's not as good as Tier 1, but it's something that, it takes a great team to do it, as we saw Fuchs do it last year.
Right, and Montreal's never won Tier 2 either, right. So it would still be a big accomplishment for them if they were able to do that.
Right, and then the final team that is not eligible for Tier 1, the Cooper Yeshiva Max. Now, it's frustrating that they're not in that top 16, but again, what does this team bring to the table?
Yeah, well, they couldn't have expected, I think, to be in the top 16. It's just very difficult to get into the top 16. Early in the year they had the Cooper tournament. They did beat MTA, who was in this tournament, but they played Magen David, who is obviously going to be one of the top teams in this year's tournament, and they struggled severely. Last year they really didn't perform so well in the tournament, but they also didn't really have much of a coaching structure last year. And they're definitely better than last year. They're older. They play more together. They're just missing D.R. Wogan from last year. He graduated. He was a stud. But outside of that, pretty much everyone's back. Jose van der Walde from last year, he's gotten significantly better. He's their big man. And then a couple of kids who we talked about last year, Frieden and Kampf, who last year were freshmen, now are sophomores and have improved as well. So I do think they'll perform better in this year's tournament. But yeah, I don't think they could have expected to be in Tier 1 just given their results against other competition this year.
Top 16 teams starting at number 16, MTA Lions, host school. They've played, the most tournaments. Obviously, this is their host school home tournament. What will they have this year?
Yeah, well, MTA is pretty known these days for being the 15, 16 seed in every tournament. This year wasn't such a good year for them, but as the host school, obviously they earn the rights in that they're hosting the tournament to get into the top 16. But in the Yeshiva League, they only won a couple of games. They have some individual pieces, but they don't really have the depth to compete against some of the other top teams, as we saw in the Yeshiva League this year. And in the Cooper tournament, they did beat Atlanta Jewish Academy, so they did get that win there. They have a couple of nice players in Daniel Barron and Josh Trehoff, who's a good big man. But I do see them struggling against some of the better teams in this competition. I'm not sure they're going to be able to compete.
And number 15, the Kohelet Kings from Philadelphia. Again, last year they did not have a chance to compete for Tier 1. Yeah. Now they have that chance. What do they have?
Yeah, well, last year, they made the Tier 3 championship. They lost to JEC in that. And they're still a good team. They lost one of their key players from that year, but they still brought back Benjamini, who's a very good player, and they brought back their center as well. So they should still be pretty good, and they've played pretty well in their general competition over the course of the season. They're not a very deep team, but at the top they are pretty good. And on the year they went 18-7. So someone to look out for. Just like MTA, though, I'm not sure they're going to be able to compete with the upper echelon of this tournament. But we definitely could see them do something in Tier 2 if they're able to win that second game.
Yeah, and you mentioned Daniel Benjamini, one of the better shooters in this tournament. So again, if you're watching them play, watch his range. He's comfortable pulling up from 5 feet, 5 feet behind the line. So again, he's a guy that can be a big impact in this tournament. Yeah. And then number 14, last year's Tier 2 champions, Fuchs Mizrahi Mayhem. Now, we said last year, a dominant performance. They lost a lot of players. Yeah. What do they have this year?
Well, they bring back Nate Jacobs, who is a stud, and we'll talk about him a little more later, but he's averaging 30 points a game this year or something. He is quite the talent. But last year Fuchs was the 14 seed. This year they're the 14 seed. They're not anywhere close to as good as they were last year. Now, they're still good, and they have good chemistry offensively, and they have a star player, so we could see them make noise again. But unlike last year, where we've kind of felt it, and we talked about it, that they were definitely they're way better than the 14 last year. That wasn't really fair. It's just the tournament was so deep last year, and it wasn't shocking at all to see them go out and win Tier 2. This year I would be surprised to see them win Tier 2, but they certainly have the capability to do so. Maybe you can tell us something about this, but they just recently played Berman twice, who obviously we haven't called Berman's name yet, and obviously Berman's did better than them. Maybe you want to tell us about how those games went.
Yeah, see, Fuchs won that first game, close game, in Ohio, 70-66. This afternoon they played again. Berman was able to pull out the win. I think these teams are both very similar, very close in styles. And I think we'll see that in this tournament. They both have the opportunity to, upset or at least put those top seeds in a little bit of a tough position early on. The way they played, they score a lot of points, they shoot the ball well. So again, these teams are very similar, and the results last night and today showed that. And number 13, for the first time ever, we're doing a play-in. Frisch and DRS will play in the Wednesday before Sarachek begins for the right to be the 13th seed. Yeah. Now, these are schools that are no stranger to being high at the Sarachek tournament. This year, they have to play an additional game just to get to the 13th seed.
Well, I mean, they're lucky to be here in the first place. I think is what we should start off by saying. As we mentioned earlier, we don't make the teams, we don't make the seeds. But there were certainly a couple of Yeshiva League teams who were disappointed to have not made it, SAR and North Shore. And you can argue about the merits of each team. The committee decided to go with Frisch and DRS. Frisch, they finished third in the Western Conference. They went 10-4 in the regular season, but then they lost to SAR in the Yeshiva League playoffs in the first round. And then DRS, they had a very difficult schedule. They started off pretty strong, and then just against stronger competition, they couldn't get it done. They finished the regular season 7-7, and then got smacked down by North Shore in the first round. But just to talk about DRS, they've only lost to the top teams. They had to play Flatbush, they had to play Magan, they had to play North Shore, they had to play Hafter. Those are all of their losses in the Yeshiva League. So I'm curious to see how they perform against Frisch, because I think we can agree that certainly Magan and Flatbush are stronger competition than Frisch. You can argue between Hafter and Frisch who is better. That's an interesting question. But at the end of the day, while they have a lot of losses on the year, they've been to good teams. They have a couple of great players in Aiden Bookbinder and Joe Aaron, so they are a good team. And Frisch has a couple of Yeshiva League All-Stars as well in Ezra Berkowitz. They have Ronnie Human, who's also a great player. They have some nice balance. It's not like last year's team where they were a little star-driven. Here they're more balanced. But Berkowitz is a good Yeshiva League big man. And them two, they'll also be disappointed about how they performed in the Yeshiva League playoffs and hungry to go into this game. Now, only one team can come out. So that means that these teams are both going to be expecting that they're going to be playing 5 games in the span of like 5 or 6 days, and one of them is going to play 1 game, and that's going to be it for their season. They're going to go out on a 3 or 4 game losing streak, depending on the team, and it'll be bad. So neither team wants to lose this game. This is about as big of a game as you can get, because it at least gets you into the actual tournament.
Yeah, another interesting point about this game is the argument of rest versus rust. So whoever wins this game is obviously going to be playing the next night against a team that has not played in quite a bit. Right. So whether that momentum carries on, obviously the winning team will have just won the previous night.
That's a great point.
Maybe they can use that momentum against a team that hasn't played in a couple of weeks. So that'll be interesting to see.
And also they'll have had the ability to play on the Max Stern Athletic Center floor. That's a big advantage, especially with how the 3-point lines are structured on that floor and just being able to get a good feel for the gym. And just one more thing, you talk about rest. How about East versus West? In the Yeshiva League playoffs, the last 4 teams remaining were all East teams. Obviously DRS was not one of them, but DRS in the East, whereas Frisch was in the West. So Frisch will obviously be looking to prove that the Western Conference was actually good this year, and DRS will be looking to prove that the East was really the dominant force, and that the results in the playoffs were not an anomaly. So it should be interesting to see.
And coming in number 12 from someplace in Maryland, we're not sure, the Berman Cougars of Hebrew Academy, which, again, we talked about them earlier.
Yeah.
This is a team that's been in this spot a couple years now.
Yeah.
Can they pull it off this year?
Right, so they're still looking to win their first ever Tier 1 qualifier and get into Tier 1 for the first time. But they've been really competitive in all these Tier 1 qualifiers they've played in the last half dozen years. They just haven't gotten it done. Obviously because of the 12, they'll be playing the 5 in the first round. It'll obviously not be an easy game. But they have the pieces to pull it off. They have a stud in Alex August. Just excellent player, not the biggest player, but not only is he a great scorer, but really good defensively. One thing about Berman, though, is that they are really small. I believe their biggest player is Gaby Margulies.
About 6 feet tall.
About 6 feet tall. I mean, that's not that big. And so they might be in for some difficulties matchup-wise. But as we discuss when we're talking about them and Fuchs, certainly they're a high-scoring team, and one which could, just in terms of how they play the game, give whoever they play in the first round some issues.
Yeah, and again, back to the size issue. Coach Jonas Singer, Coach Norm Levin, they know they don't have the size. They game plan for it. Their ball pressure is tremendous.
Yeah.
And then shout out to guys like Naftali Fischler and Itai Roseman, who play bigger than they actually are, so they can defend the bigger guys, even though they're only 5'11", 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
So watch for that team to do some damage.
It's an issue we see a lot of times with these out-of-town schools, that they're outmatched size-wise, and it's always a big question about how you make up for it, and you've got to make up for it with ball pressure. And that's the case not just with Berman, it's with all these schools which have issues size-wise. You have to use your smallness to your advantage in a sense.
Right. Coming on number 11, another Maryland school from Baltimore, Maryland, the Beth-Phila Warriors. Now, this is a team that has not been in this tournament very often, but this is a year that they feel like they can do some damage here.
Yeah, well, the last time they were in the tournament was in 2019, which was an absolute disaster. They did not win a game as the 12 seed. This year they're the 11 seed. Obviously, they'll be looking to win a little more than one game. happens to be, I think they're better than the 11 seed. I think this might be a little bit of an underseed. I do think they're a strong team. They're just kind of like they're dogs defensively, really, and they just give teams a lot of difficulty doing the things that they want to do. They're good at taking away what you want to do, and that can be really tough in a tournament like Sarachek where there's a lot of pressure, having to do things which you're not comfortable doing. So I'm curious to see how they'll perform in this tournament. They beat Berman pretty handily, which is also part of why it's weird to see the 12-11 gap be non-existent really in how these teams are seeded. It's also the second time in a row that Berman's been one away from another Maryland team. Last year Berman was the 13 and Ishiwama Korchaim was the 12. So once again, they've been seeded just by another Maryland team and looking to prove that they're actually the better one. BT is a good team, and Michael Cohen is a real nice player for them as well. But beyond him, they're pretty balanced, and their strength is defensively.
Yeah, and number 10 from the Yeshiva League, the Ramaz Rams. Now, this is a team that is a couple of years removed from winning the Yeshiva League.
That's right.
They're always a threat. They're a 10 seed, but they're always a threat to win the whole thing.
Yeah, and with Ramaz, if you asked where would they be seated maybe a month ago, the answer probably would have been 5, 6. But the last 2 games of the Yeshiva League regular season, they lost to TABC. Both were very close games. And then in the playoffs, they had a very disappointing performance against Hafter, who we haven't named yet, who shot 11 for 17 from 3 in that game and just kind of owned the game on Ramaz's floor. So really poor ending to the year, and they'll be trying to take that bad taste out of their mouths, having lost the last 3 games. But yeah, they're a good team, and it's tough to say whether they belong at 10. Obviously based on their recent performances, they belong at 10, but they showed signs of what they can be early in the year. They have several really good players. Milan Kushner, Isaac Owayon, and Bobby Segura are really 3 nice players for them. Sarachek, when they were in Sarachek last, after they had won the Yeshiva League championship, obviously was a little disappointing for them. They won the Tier 2 championship. They didn't really care about winning the Tier 2 championship. It was very weird. Kind of shows you about the expectations which this program has. So I think they're gunning, even with how the last few games of the season went. I think they're once again gunning for a Tier 1 championship. They're not looking to win Tier 2. But based on their seeding, they're expected to fall into Tier 2.
Yeah, and again, with this team, the coaching staff allows the players to really kind of find their own game. There's no rigidity in how they play. So the players, they have the freedom to kind of, attack when they feel it's open, and that's a credit to Coach Scott Fitzgerald of Scott Ferguson.
So it's
I'm an English major. I can't blame you. Scott Ferguson, in terms of what he's done with this program.
Yeah.
And then coming on number 9, we have the Hafter Hawks. Yeah. Another Yeshiva League team.
Right. Who we just mentioned.
Yeah. Right.
Right. They beat Ramaz in the Yeshiva League
and again, they have a tough first round matchup.
Yeah.
But should they win that game, a matchup with the number 1 team?
Right. So, look, when it comes to Hafter, this season was really interesting because their big man Peter Drucker went down with an injury somewhat early in the year, and he just makes them very different. Outside of him, they're really strong guard play. They have really strong guard play. Kevin Levy, a phenomenal player, and some other nice pieces. Sam Siri, and Salem as well also developed really well over the course of the season. But with Drucker on the floor, they're just a different beast on both sides of the floor. Offensively, it gives them the option to play inside out, especially when shots aren't falling. And defensively, he's just a very big presence in the paint and makes shots difficult. There'll be a question here of, do they actually belong at the 9 seed, or are they better just now that they're healthy? And it'll be really curious to see how this plays out. They lost to Magen David in the Yeshiva League semifinals. It wasn't that close. They kind of hung around, but just didn't have enough. They'll be looking to bounce back against the 8 seed in the first round.
And the 8 seed is the Maimonides MCATs. It's a very senior-heavy team. Yeah. Last year, they lost a close game to Eula. This is a team that wants to get the job done this year as an 8 seed. As you said, a first-round matchup against Hafter. Yeah. What do you see from this team?
Yeah, so Maimo was probably the disappointment of the tournament last year. They entered as the 11 seed, and they expected to win that first-round game, and they ended up, after losing that game, to lose the next game, and then I think they even lost the next game after that. They just kind of spiraled, which can happen. If you have high expectations and you lose that first game, things can spiral out of control really quickly. That Eula game was maybe close score-wise, but they were they were out physical. They were really dominated in that game from an eye test perspective. Regardless of the fact that the final score was only 10 or so points. And that's something which I think they're going to be trying to do differently this year. Now that they're seniors, maybe they have that experience. Maybe they'll be able to perform better against physicality. Obviously we mentioned now they're going to be playing against Hafter, so we're going to be playing against a 6'5", big dude in Peter Drucker. I'm curious how Weinstock will handle that matchup, because he struggled against Eula's big man last year. And they have some nice pieces around him as well, including Renan Guberts, who's a really nice guard. So they could make noise here, but if they lose, then it'll be a really disappointing 2-year stretch for them.
Well, you said I think the first game really dictates how the tournament goes for a lot of these teams. They lose, especially if you expect to win, you kind of fall off a cliff. That's what happened to Maimonides last year.
Right.
And number 7, the Ida Crown Aces. Now this is a team that has had a lot of talent for the last few years, but has not gotten the job done.
Yeah.
And there's no secret about that. This year, once again, one of the top 7 teams at number 7. What can they do this year? Do you see them pulling it off?
I guess we'll have to see. It's all up to them in terms of how they put it on the court. Something we talked about last year was, are they just hype or are they for real? And they can say maybe they were a little injured last year in the tournament. Wertman wasn't so healthy and whatever. But at the end of the day, they just didn't get the job done. And then in Tier 2, they didn't get the job done. And we used to call them the Kings of Tier 2, but now they haven't won. They've gone to Tier 2 for a few years in a row, but they haven't won it there. So they're kind of losing their grip on the title. Obviously, they don't want to be the Kings of Tier 2. They want to be the Kings of Tier 1. But they've only done it once, in 2008. Although all time in Sarachek, they generally perform well. They just haven't been able to perform well within the Tier 1 level because they haven't been able to get there. But this year with Jacob Wertman back, sounds like he's fully healthy. He should be a good player to watch in this tournament. And Avi Okner is a nice player as well for them. They do, as we often see with Chicago teams, generally play a 1-3-1.
Right.
The 1-3-1 trapping defense, and not a lot of teams will see it over the course of the season, but it's also difficult to play on a larger floor, like we have in the Maxton Athletic Center here on the campus of Yeshiva University. So, it'll be interesting again to see how that plays out in the tournament as they struggled with it the last few years.
Right, as you said, that 1-3-1, they're going to be playing against the Ramaz Rams, number 10 seed.
Yeah.
If they come out in that 1-3-1, let's see how Ramaz handles it. I mean, this is a team that has played a lot of good defenses in the Yeshiva League.
Yep.
They can be patient if they can work the ball to the corners, especially against the 1-3-1. It'll be an interesting matchup. I think, I expect a close game. We'll see if Ida Crown can finally get to Tier 1.
Yep.
And number 6 seed, the reigning 2-time Sarachek champions, the Valley Toro Wolfpack, coming in at number 6.
Yeah. Yeah, well, not often that we see a 2-time reigning champion come in at number 6, but once you look at their personnel, it's quite understandable. They lost the studs of the team from last year in Johnny Dan and Noam Yuchas. But they still played at a top level this year. They always defend quite well. And one thing from this year, different from last year in terms of personnel in a positive manner, is that Levi Bannon, their big man, is back, and he's a big X factor. At 6'6", he can be a big problem. Last year he had a bad leg injury and he wasn't able to play in the tournament. And this year they've, besides him, relied a lot on Ethan List and Gaby Revivo. So they still have some pieces, on this team. It's just a different makeup than they've had in previous years.
Yeah, and back to, it's a new makeup, but Coach Leora Schwarzberg has built a program that knows how to win. I mean, the last few years, we've seen them fall behind in championship games by double-digit points, fall behind in early round games, and they always stay level-headed, get back in the game. So this is a team that has the right culture and knows what it takes to win.
And I mean, they've won now 8 straight Sarachek games just by being, back-to-back champions. And even for the guys who weren't key contributors on either of those teams who are now playing this year, just being around that will help you. You get a better feel for what's needed. You don't, the pressure doesn't get to you as much because you've seen what it takes. Instead of knowing what it takes, you actually have seen what it takes. And that is a big difference maker.
At number 5, we have the TABC Storm. Now, this is a team that had a tough loss in the Yeshiva League.
Yeah.
They want to bounce back. What can they do in Sarachek to bounce back?
Yeah, they looked really bad in that loss to North Shore in the quarterfinals. I mean, they were kind of manhandled on their own home floor. I mean, it was at one point the final score was 38-24, but it was much closer than that. It was 28-24 at one point. It was like a 1-point game in the third. But just based on the score, as you can tell, it was a grinded out game, and they were manhandled. They They're a young team, TABC is, and they kind of weren't ready to play against a senior-heavy, physical team, dominant defensive unit like North Shore. And so, now that they're kind of having to learn on the job here, now that they jump from that straight into Sarachek, I'll be curious to see how they can improve, because something that did really well this year was develop over the course of the season. They struggled off the bat, as we said, very young team. Their arguably best player, Eyal Kindler, is a junior, and so they won the JV championship as last year, and so they brought in a lot of 10th graders from that team, and they improved a lot over the course of the season. They were able to secure the 1 seed in the Yeshiva League Western Conference. Despite losing 2 games very early, they went on a long winning streak to end the regular season. So, something to look out for is how they can bounce back from that. And, besides for Kindler, they also have a couple other nice pieces, including Aiden Gurin, who's really improved over his course time at TABC. He's a really, really good shooter, great release as well. And he's a big guy, too, for a shooter. So they have some nice pieces, and they've earned the 5 seed.
At number 4, we have the Shalhevet Firehawks. This is a team that was the number 1 seed last year.
Yeah.
They have won a couple tournaments, in 2019, 2020. They're not so accustomed to a little bit of a higher ranking,
Yeah.
but could they make some noise as a 4 seed this year?
Yeah, right. So California teams have actually won now 4 straight Saracheks, right? 2018, 2019, Shalhevet, and then last 2, 2022, 2023, Valley Torah. And before Shalhevet, lost that streak, it's not just that they won 2; they also had been to the championships in those previous ones. So they've proven themselves year in, year out as a force to be reckoned with, as one of the best teams in the country. Obviously it's just a really strong program that Ryan Coleman has built over there. And this year, once again, you don't look at them and say, oh, that's the best team in the country. And I think that was even the case last year. Even though they were the 1 seed, you don't really look at them and be like, oh, that's the best team. That's the clear best team. But they have some nice pieces, and Aiden Betran is just a phenomenal scorer. Definitely one of the top players in this tournament, and he kind of carries them offensively, and they're always good defensively.
Yeah, and just back to Ryan Coleman, Coach Ryan Coleman, the system that he has on the defensive end and on the offensive end, it's always there. The players buy into it. The coverages on defense, the rotations always on point. Offensively, they're constantly moving. They've got a lot of backdoor sets.
Yeah.
They set a lot of flare screens. They do a lot off the ball, which makes it very difficult to guard, even when they don't have that, typical star power.
Yep.
At number 3, the Flatbush Falcons, almost playing soon to be playing in the Yeshiva League Championship game. Number 3 seed. What is this team?
Yeah, so I gotta say it's a little surprising to see Flatbush here at 3. I kind of would have expected to see them at 2. The Yeshiva League hasn't performed so well in Sarachek of late, but it just feels this year that the best 2 teams in the country are Yeshiva League teams in Flatbush and Magen David. Obviously the committee slightly disagrees here. They put obviously Flatbush, and we'll get to number 2 soon, but we'll get to number 1 as well soon. But obviously Flatbush, who thought they would be at 2, is at 3. So that means that someone besides the Yeshiva League team is at either 2 or 1. When it comes to Flatbush, it's just been a tremendous year under first-year head coach Matt Malk. They're such an aggressive defensive team. The way they pressure the ball and are still able to keep to their defensive rotations. Not a lot of Yeshiva League teams put pressure on the ball. A lot of Yeshiva League teams play a zone. Even the ones who play a man don't really get up in you so much, and they really get up in you. And they do it somewhat deep as well. They don't just do it with their top 5. They have a tremendous big in Benny Keita, who is a force to be reckoned with down low, a tremendous athlete too. And they have nice pieces around him as well. Isaac Cooper is a great shooter. Ronnie Shaya, who hit the game-tying free throw on 1 leg pretty much to send the game to North Shore to get them into the championship in the first place, is a great point guard for them. And Flatbush has some really nice pieces, and they guard. They're quite talented. And in the Yeshiva League, they pretty much did everything except for beat Magen David. That's all they've really failed to do this year. They did beat them once, but at the end of the day, they're 1-3 against Magen David, and they'll be looking to have gotten to 2 and 3 before Sarachek will have started.
And number 2, from LA in California, the Eula Panthers.
Yeah.
Now, this is a team that made the semifinals last year of Tier 1.
That's right.
Job not finished. Can they finish the job this year?
Yeah, well, last year we saw Coach Mizels on the sidelines. This year it's Coach Pollock's first year at the helm. Coach Mizels has taken a little bit of a step back, and they had a strong season. They went 22-13 against very, very good competition. Last year they were kind of a surprise into the semifinals, proved some people wrong, including myself, in that run. And they did it through their physicality and through a couple of young guards. They still have some really nice pieces this year. Most of the guys returned from last year. Yishai Hollander is a great piece. Yishai Rosenblatt is a great piece. Once again, they are going to be one of the best teams in this tournament. At the end of last year's tournament, we were saying, who do we think are going to be the top teams in next year's tournament? The first one we pointed to was Eula, just because of who they bring back. And something to note, Eula played Shalhevet earlier in the year and they beat them in overtime. So just something to note on a seeding basis. Again, we don't make the seeds, we don't decide the teams, but perhaps that's what the committee had in mind when they put Eula ahead of Shalhevet.
Right. And number 1, we have the Magen David Warriors, top of the Yeshiva League, top of Jewish Hoops America.
Yeah, Magen David has basically done everything this year except a weird loss to Frisch, and they lost to Flatbush once, but they weren't even healthy when they lost to Flatbush. Just a dominant year. They're 34-2, and they're superstar powered. Josh Shabbat, Moses Smecki, Mark Sardar. I could go on and on. Haber is a great big man for them who was injured at some point earlier in the year. They're just super talented. They're always so well coached by Coach Spike Dweck. There's absolutely no debate that they belong as the 1 seed in this tournament.
Well, there you have it. Those are seeds 20-1. The schedule, Poppers, what's the schedule?
Yeah, well, we saw last year Fuchs played the 10 a.m. game. Well, they get to do it again. This time they're playing against Flatbush instead of against North Shore. The 11:30 game, sometimes we see the 8-9 matchups, not always the night game. So here again, MIMO is going to be playing after in the 11:30 a.m. game. And the lunchtime slot at 1 will be Ida Crown against Ramaz, and what we both agree will be a very good battle. At 2:30 will be Shalhevet playing against the winner of the play-in game. And the play-in game will be, I believe, at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday night at the Max Stern Athletic Center. At 4 o'clock will be Eula against Kohelet. 5:30 Valley against Beth Phyllis should be a great matchup. At 7, Magen David is going to see what MTA can do. And at 8:30, Berman will be playing against DABC.
Well, that's the schedule. You have the seats. Thank you for tuning in. Good luck.